Welcome to The Screen Queen, the show where I'll be talking about your favorite show or your favorite movie. You'll just have to find out what you're about to know. This is your Screen Queen, your host, Samantha Parrish.
So, Pocahontas. It might not be accurate, but it sure is historical. Hello there and welcome to The Screen Queen. This is your host on the East Coast, Samantha Parrish. Pocahontas has garnered a reputation for being a sore spot in cinema history for being a very, very historically inaccurate film, but over the years, some people have started to look past its inaccuracies. Despite the controversy and reputation that Pocahontas has garnered, it was one of the most ambitious projects that Disney had ever done. And this is something in the same realm within The Lion King that also had some very ambitious animation. This was a film that people had a lot of anticipation for, and even though the writing was on the wall that this was going to be a slightly different take on the true tale of Pocahontas, there were a lot of people that cited how much they enjoyed working on the film. Most of them were the musicians, and we'll get into that later on in the episode. As much as people don't like Pocahontas, there are some people that do like Pocahontas, and I'm one of those people. I do have this movie to thank for being my gateway film into paying attention to how movies are made. I watched the behind-the-scenes featurettes marathoned it. I watched it over and over again, and I was soaking up any information I could get about how movies are made. So if it wasn't for Pocahontas, I probably wouldn't be here. It's kind of a weird thing to say, but you'll find out more about my love for this movie as we go along with the episode. In the mood point of the 90s, there was a lot of focus on this film for being the game changer for Disney, and it certainly was, but there's a lot more to this film that you might not have known about. So, what was it that happened during the production of this slightly different twist on the Native American princess? This is Pocahontas. So right off the bat, I want to talk about why Pocahontas was the game changer for Disney. In the mood point, in the 90s, there was a major shift change that Disney was trying to do in its Renaissance period. With the Renaissance beginning with The Little Mermaid, and top that up with Beauty and the Beast, and then we had Aladdin, and then I forgot what we had in 93, and then we had The Lion King. Finally, we have Pocahontas being a film about a true person. Albeit that's not what she looks like, but still, Disney's got a Disney, and so they thought that's what had to happen. And this was going to be what made the money. The reason why there was more emphasis on the film was because Disney didn't have much faith in The Lion King. In the early 90s, there was a process that was called Movie A and Movie B, and that's basically like we have the front plan and the back plan. So Movie A was The Lion King, and Movie B was Pocahontas being the backup plan just in case The Lion King didn't work. Now, we all know The Lion King is one of the most amazing animated movies ever made. It's made $1 billion in the box office as the highest grossing animated movie until Frozen came along. But back then, they were like, this is a gamble. We're not lying about that. All the puns intended. However, when The Lion King came out, it shocked everyone's expectations that people loved The Lion King. And so Disney is looking around like, well, what do we do with Pocahontas then? I mean, we made this movie and this was supposed to make what we didn't think was going to happen with The Lion King, so they're like, well, we'll put it down anyway. And then the whole switcheroo happened where Pocahontas did get the praise for its animation, but people have to point out its historical inaccuracies at every twist and turn, even the inaccuracies under the inaccuracies. So I'm sure Disney was scratching their heads like, did we succeed and mess up at the same time? But Pocahontas did give us a lot of stuff for what would happen in the future to come with Disney. It's not recognized as much, but there's not enough credit given to how Pocahontas really did change the game in Disney when it comes to characters, and the way that some things had to also change in Disney as well. This is one of the first films to ever have a Native American protagonist. Before, had some European characters. We had an Afghan princess, but we never really had a Native American character before until Pocahontas came along. And that would eventually set the way for other characters of color to come in. This was also the first film to have an interracial romance. Their romance is every level of ewy, considering that these two people only met each other for maybe about 10 minutes, and they definitely were not the ages depicted in the movie, but Disney did what they did, and there's really nothing that we can do about that. That's just kind of the way the game played. This was also one of the first films of many of the films in the 90s was retracting some of the stuff that Disney had been doing for quite some time. Now, it's no big secret that Disney has done some very sketchy stuff when it comes to depicting characters of race, having to say some very taboo things, or having certain items being depicted on screen. Pocahontas served as the first film to retract those things. This was the first time in Disney history that a film had been censored due to its content. It took 40 years! We finally got there! And as much as there are some things that kind of were a product of its time, and they did have to, unfortunately, talk about the certain terms that Indians were given. This is very tricky to try and say because I hate racism with every fiber of my being. And I thought about this before I did the episode, that not everything can be forgiven with, oh, well, it was a product of its time. Like, well, it's still being showed. I get that there are some things that have to go to an extreme to show how bad it was, but at the same time, it's an extreme for showing bad things. And it was so extreme, they had to redub the former lyrics to the Savages song. If you watch the Savages scene and pay attention to the settlers, their mouths do not match the words that are being sang, sung, said, all that stuff. The censorship in Pocahontas is kind of like a double-edged sword. On one hand, you do finally have the end of a lot of racist terms being said in a Disney movie, and it ends with Pocahontas, but at the same time, that still exists. You still hear and see some of the most insulting and awful terms given to a Native American. It's one of those things that it was a product of its time, so it can be addressed, but it's a tough call to forgive it or to not forgive it. It's still kind of up in the air with a lot of people about when they see. So with this film being the first movie to ever have a Native American character, this also does mean that it's another Disney princess, so to speak. There's a lot of toss-up about how to label Pocahontas in Disney history, that she is technically a Disney princess because she is the daughter of the chief, which would technically make her a Disney princess due to the social stature within the Indian tribe, but at the same time, that's still kind of a weird toss-up knowing that she's a real-life princess among characters that are fictional princesses. Something to think about when you watch Pocahontas. But something else to think about is how Pocahontas is created. Now, right off the bat, that's where a lot of the issues are, is because Pocahontas does not look how she's supposed to look in history. Realistically, Pocahontas was about 10 or 12 years old when she saved John Smith, and that's kind of weird, seeing a 12-year-old all of a sudden become this 22, 23-year-old stunning woman. It's kind of weird to have to think that 55 people worked on the character of Pocahontas, and as much as it's weird to see that this is the final product, it's actually interesting to know how they finally found the look for Pocahontas. There were three main people that served as the design for Pocahontas. The models Naomi Campbell and Kirsty Turlington, they were two of the main people for the look and body of Pocahontas, but in terms of facial features, that actually comes from the woman who voices Pocahontas, Irene Bedard. There is something that I do want to say as a positive note for Pocahontas' character design. It gave us what could have been her life. Now, we don't know what her future is going to be like because, well, Pocahontas didn't have a future, unfortunately. Now, even though, yes, she didn't look like that, and unfortunately, she did die in her 20s, but we never got to see Pocahontas older. Remember how in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where we got to see more of Sharon Tate's life because her life was tragically cut short? So we got to see what could have been her life and her getting to enjoy being pregnant and knowing that her life was spared as opposed to what happened in real life. But it's nice that we were given what could have been. Now, compare that to Pocahontas. It has been said in history that she had a tragic end to her life, that she was sexually assaulted and possibly pregnant while she also was sick with tuberculosis. So she never really got to age. We do get to see what it would have been like if Pocahontas had lived through her 20s. It would have been nice to know that she had a long life and that she had a good time. So even though this movie is historically inaccurate in every sense of the history as well as its depiction of the real people in history, you kind of have to give it to the animators that they did give us something that never got to happen, but it does exist in Disney. It's what could have been, what never got to be, but it's nice to know what it could have looked like for Pocahontas. But there is another character we have to talk about, and that is John Smith, who was... I find it very funny considering that his characterization is a shared sore spot with everything else in here, but yet John Smith is like known as one of the biggest dicks in history, so he's already a sore spot in history itself. And yet his character design is actually far more interesting than the actual John Smith. The early designs for John Smith, they had him looking a little bit casual. He wasn't as clothed as he was in the original design they had for him, which had him wearing a white shirt with the exposed chest. They had him wearing baggy pants. His gun was off his shoulder. They had him just kind of looking a bit casual, disheveled. It was kind of an interesting idea before they settled on having him looking a little bit more polished, chest not exposed, all that stuff, you know, boring but handsome. His likeness does come from his voice actor, which is Mel Gibson. This blew my mind when I put the pieces together when I was older, but for the desk of the artist, one of the pictures on his desk is a screenshot from Lethal Weapon. But there's a little bit I want to go on for Mel Gibson being in this movie. So I do want to say, despite the controversy that Mel Gibson has been in his prime years, 80s, 90s, that was my favorite actors. Mel did a good job, but my God, that boy picked some historically inaccurate things. Some of it was his fault. I don't know what the hell happened, but that boy has a knack for being in historically inaccurate movies. Let's look at his timeline real quick. First there was Braveheart, which came out in the same year as Pocahontas, so it's just like, dude, it's like a double feature of inaccuracies. And then you had Pocahontas, and then The Patriot, Passion of the Christ, and then finally he learned his lesson by going back to basics and doing his homework and made Hacksaw Ridge that is not littered with historical inaccuracies. It's just like, oh my God, he broke the pattern. So in a way, you kind of have to find that a little bit hilarious that you have an actor in this movie that's historically inaccurate, and then he went on to go make movies that were also historically inaccurate or going to go be in movies that are historically inaccurate. You gotta admit, that's a little bit funny. There's something that I thought about with Pocahontas. As much as this is a very historically inaccurate movie, this is still one of the major movie loves of my life, and there's something that I thought about this movie when I was writing the notes for this episode, is that it's picked on for the controversy for having historically inaccurate characters, historically inaccurate things, and feeling too Disney-fied. So, in the past we've had controversial movies that weren't really controversial because we were distracted by how beautiful it was. This was one of those films that was so controversial that it distracted from the beauty of the film. back in the 90s, this was regarded as the most ambitious film. Like, I mentioned The Lion King, and that's a spectacle, but they really threw everything in the kitchen sink for Pocahontas to go above and beyond for the graphics, the design, everything. It was known as the hardest and ambitious production in Disney history. A lot of producers have said this was like the cream of the crop in an entire Disney history. This was the toughest project. So, as much as people picked on the movie for how bad it is and not liking the fact that it's inaccurate, the hard work didn't really get noticed until years later. We're talking 10 years later, when a lot of people got to speak out about the design work and the music. The music is the main focal point that I really want to talk about, because we could have had a longer movie because of the music. With Disney has always made a lot of good tunes. We've gotten some amazing music in the beginning of Disney, from Snow White, and then it continued on the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and there's been some people that have come along for the ride. Some of these names like Alan Menken, who you might not know the name, but you'll know the music. He's the one that did a lot of the music for The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and he did the music for Pocahontas. And the music that he did with the orchestra, it was kind of like a wheel of misfortune, because they never knew what was going to get scrapped or what was going to get put back. There was going to be an additional song in the movie. They even made it, but unfortunately they're like, it doesn't fit. We're going to have to scrap it. That song was In the Middle of the River. And I listened to it. It's okay. It's charming. It's beautiful. But there were too many charming and beautiful songs. That sounds like a strange complaint, doesn't it? But there's a thing in movies where you can get taxed on, that you don't want to get fed too much of something, that to the point that you're going to get tired of it. There's something about having an audience digest all these things that you don't want them to get tired of it. Having too many songs in this movie would deviate away from the plot, and we couldn't really get to enjoy the other songs in the movie. On top of that, there was a very important song that almost got scrapped, and that was Just Around the River Bend. That is the song that a lot of people enjoyed to create, and the studio executives were like, I don't know, man. I don't know about this song. But thankfully, they pushed it and they got it in the movie. However, that couldn't be said for the love anthem of the movie. You know, love anthem, John Smith, Pocahontas. I know, ewy, but still, I have to admit that this song I'm about to talk about, it's one of my favorite Disney songs of all time. And that is If I Never Knew You. Not many people know about this hidden part of Disney history with the forgotten love anthem between John Smith and Pocahontas. Besides the fact that it's strange to have a love anthem between these two characters that did not know each other in real life, but when you look at the fictional portrayal of Pocahontas and John Smith, it does work together with the way that these two characters came together. They fell in love, and unfortunately they can't be together. And in the movie, when John Smith is captured by Pocahontas' tribe, she goes to see him one last time and to say how sorry she is and how heartbroken she is. And she says, you know, if we never met, none of this would have happened. And he said, Pocahontas, look at me. I'd rather die than live 100 years without knowing you. As much as this film, again, it's hard to stomach the fact that it's two people that existed that never really had this relationship, you know, for obvious reasons being in different ages. But when you look at this moment and taking that all away, that is the most sweeping, romantic, powerful moment to have this plea to someone else saying, I don't regret that I met you. And then the song begins of John Smith singing about how he's so glad that he met her, that his life is complete, that he met her. And when you think about it, that really is love, an entire definition, is that you don't regret meeting someone. Think about the other Disney songs real quick. We've had Kiss the Girl, A Whole New World, Beauty and the Beast. They all talk about the moment. They don't talk about the future. They don't say what goes beyond or having to really express their love for that person in such a powerful plea. This song talked about how much they loved that they met this person. I cannot recall another Disney song that went to this powerful level to make this ultimate plea of love like If I Never Knew You did. Seriously, think about it. On the 10-year anniversary for the movie, there is a DVD release, and in the special features, the directors, Alan Menken, Roy E. Disney, the brother of Walt Disney, all talked about how much they loved If I Never Knew You, and when they were asked, what's your favorite part of the movie? And they all said, If I Never Knew You. The best part of the movie that everyone loved got scrapped. You gotta feel a little bit bad for them knowing that the part they loved the most they couldn't get to share with the audience because they had to do the professional thing and take it out because kids and adults just didn't really vibe with it. But now that it was put back into the movie, there is a little bit more recognition to the song, and it's a very beautiful song. Mel Gibson sings in the movie, and that's his first time singing. He's got a pretty damn good voice. Even the creator of the song said that himself. And him paired with the singer Judy Kuhn, who is the singing voice of Pocahontas. Oh, it is one of the most underrated duets in Disney history. And on top of that, there was the cover of the song that was created for the film. Because again, Pocahontas has some of the best music that is still regarded as the best music of all time. And you had Vanessa Williams doing Colors of the Wind, and then you had John Cicada and Cheyenne singing the love anthem, If I Never Knew You, which you can hear in the credits of the song, but it's kind of sad when you look at that movie, not knowing, well, why the hell is that song there? I don't recall it being in the movie, not knowing, it's because it got scrapped. That's why we never heard the original. But unfortunately, If I Never Knew You wasn't the only thing that got scrapped. There is one part of Pocahontas' movie history that never saw the light of day, and that was actually due to a personal tragedy that happened during the film. There is a humorous balance in the film that we have all this horrible, horrible part of history with what happened to the Indians. And then we have to balance that out with the animal humor with Flit and Miko. It originally was not going to have a Flit and Miko. There was going to be a Percy, the dog in the film, but they optioned for a turkey named Red Feather, voiced by the late John Candy. I was too young to know who John Candy was when I first started absorbing all of the information about the production for Pocahontas, but knowing that that was one of the few films that John Candy was supposed to be in, it's kind of sad that we never got that, because some of the stuff they put together with him, oh my goodness, that's so great. It kind of rivals the genie from Aladdin of having someone of a prolific comedic status voicing a character. It does make you wonder how the movie could have gone, having like a spot-on comedian in the movie with the other comedians like, Billy Connolly being in the film and some other people that do have a good background in comedy. It could have been really great to have him in the film. I'm okay with Miko and Flint. I don't know how everyone else is okay with Miko and Flint. They're just there. But at the same time, I like that with the film, there's not a whole lot of them, that they exist with Pocahontas in certain scenes or by themselves. Not very long, so it doesn't deviate away from the plot. But still, it would have been interesting what had happened if they had Red Feather in the movie. If you ever get the chance to find any of the scrapped character designs for Red Feather, it's very much worth the watch to be able to see one little last part of John Candy. I do find it a bit ironic that it's a movie about history, and then in turn the movie went down in history for a world record that to this day cannot be topped. When Pocahontas was going to be premiering, they did a release in Central Park where they put up these giant projectors, and if you ever get the chance to find this, it is amazing to see this mini documentary about the release of Pocahontas in Central Park in New York. They put up these giant projectors, and there were some people that were talking about how the production was going because there was the fear of the weather because it was gonna rain, and it's like, we got technical equipment out here, we got 100,000 people out here, what are we gonna do? Thankfully, it did not rain, and the movie was played, and people sat in the park. Some people watched from their apartments to see Pocahontas being played on these 5 giant projector screens. Some of the actors from the movie showed up. The singing voice and the speaking voice of Pocahontas showed up. Russell Means, who voiced Chief Powhatan, showed up. And I believe there were some other people that showed up. Mel Gibson, unfortunately, could not make an appearance because he was too busy making another historical inaccurate movie and going to the premiere of that. So it was a grand thing to have. The actresses were interviewed about getting to be here, and you can see their faces beaming with happiness that they got to be a part of a major Disney production that was portrayed in a different kind of premiere where it wasn't glitz and glamour, it was just people coming together to enjoy a Disney movie. And that got forgotten in history because people paid too much attention to the historical inaccuracies of Pocahontas. They didn't really get to see that it was a giant premiere of a movie from Disney that, despite what it did and some of the changes that were made, it's still a remarkably beautiful film. Looking at Pocahontas' presentation in the 90s, it was more than just being a Disney film. It became another one of the Indian movies in the 90s. I don't think this gets looked at too much for how much we have for Indian movies. I mean, today we have representation with the show Yellowstone. There was also the show Longmire, but we had to have some start somewhere of some relevant movies in the early 90s. I don't know much about the 80s or 70s, but 90s was like the peak of being able to have more Indian culture movies where they were the main character or they were the secondary character, that they were just like in the background, just conveniently there with the cowboys passing by. They got to have their spotlight. And there were a good batch of those in the 90s. We had Dances with Wolves, which I don't know how people feel about that, and honestly, I haven't seen all the way through, but I have heard good things about the Indian representation in that movie. There were some great actors that got their start doing other roles to represent Indians by being in Dances with Wolves, and then eventually there was The Last of the Mohicans, there was Thunderheart, Lakota Woman, which starred Irene Bedard of Pocahontas, and then you finally had Pocahontas midway into the 90s. So it's kind of like a nice little timeline to see that there's a progression of seeing all these Indian-themed movies coming together. So as much as Pocahontas didn't really get a whole lot right, it still did something. Irene Bedard and Russell Means, who are Indian activists, did go on to praise the film and how much they enjoyed working on it. And really looking at Pocahontas, it helped them out as well to get further recognition for what they do in the Indian activists group. So to close out this episode, I gotta give credit where credit's due. If it wasn't for Pocahontas, I wouldn't be here right now making the show. I wouldn't have had that appreciation for movies and the hard work that goes into a film if it wasn't for the way that I knew how Pocahontas was created. This was my gateway into understanding how movies are made, and it made me appreciate those movies, and it also made me want to be in that spot one day when I can be able to create something and bring that for other people. I've always said on this show that you choose how you want to be entertained, that you choose the takeaway from what you want. What Pocahontas did for me was that it showed me what it takes to create a movie, and then if you work hard enough, it'll get there. I mean, yeah, that's what we've always known. But Pocahontas was the movie that taught that to me. I didn't learn that from other people. I didn't learn that from friends or family or school. I learned that from Pocahontas. There's a thing to be said about the way a movie can impact us for what it can do. The way Pocahontas impacted many people, whether they inspired them to go create movies or it impacted the Indian reservations, where you got to see more of an awareness of Indian culture. You got to see another further development for Disney. Pocahontas did a lot of stuff, and thankfully people have kind of pushed the controversy aside and saw it for what it truly is, and that is being a beautiful film. It impacted a generation of the 90s kids. It eventually got its credit that needed to be due. It's a film that lives in the hearts and minds of many, many, many people, many kids, adults, and it goes on for generations. Pocahontas might not be the perfect Disney movie to some standards, but does it have to be perfect to be enjoyable? No, I don't think so. There's a lot of movies that we enjoy that have a flaw here and there, or historical inaccuracy here and there. People are unfortunately quick to point out the one thing that was wrong with a film, even though everything else was beautiful. And that one little thing shouldn't obscure the film for how beautiful it is. It's an absolute masterpiece, a triumph of animation that kept going. When we look at the history of animation in Disney, this was just another tally for another success in the paving for animation. Everything down from the songs, the acting, the animation, it truly is a remarkable film that really did go down in history. And that is officially a wrap on the Pocahontas episode. Wow, this was interesting to do this episode. I've been wanting to do another animated movie for a while, and I'm glad that I finally got to get around to doing Pocahontas. I think I didn't realize how much I loved the movie until now, that it was a pivotal part of my childhood, but it's strange in the perspective when you really talk it out loud for what you never notice about something that you really love, and you get to appreciate it more. And I'm glad I got to share it on here. I'm really glad I got to share this story about the story of Pocahontas, but also getting to share my story about why I love Pocahontas and what it did for me. I don't think I really said it out loud about how much this movie is the pinpoint of my movie-loving history. So in a way, this is an episode about my history too, I guess. It's a history episode all around. Alrighty. Well, now is the time to find out what the next episode is going to be on the Screen Queen. If you are new here, there's a lotto system where I have no idea what the next episode's going to be. So a bunch of these random pieces of paper in this bowl is going to determine what the next episode is going to be. So let me mix this up really good. I got parts and pieces flying out. Okay. Alright, let me reach in the bottom because that's how you do this. Oh, I got one. What's it gonna be? Okay. Alright. I'll take it. That's not a bad thing. That was just kind of unexpected because I have a heavy movie title in my hand. Alright. So the next episode on the Screen Queen is going to be Apt Pupil. Now, there are some people that are going to know that movie, and I bet they're gritting their teeth right now, and there are people that don't know that movie, and they're scratching their heads, and it's going to be a hell of an episode. Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for tuning in to the show. You are amazing. You are awesome. Don't forget that. And remember, listen with your heart, don't talk to trees, watch out for your animal friends, and, yeah, stay amazing. I don't know what the hell I had to go with that ending, but it went somewhere. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. This is your Screen Queen, signing off. Bye-bye!